He didn't look dangerous. On November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a middle-aged man wearing a dark suit, white shirt, and thin black tie walked into Portland International Airport. He carried a briefcase. He spoke calmly. He bought a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper. Nothing about him stood out. And that was the point. Flight 305 was a short trip. 36 passengers. A routine route. The kind of flight people barely remembered once it landed. The man who called himself Cooper took a seat near the back of the plane. He ordered a bourbon and soda. He paid for it in cash. He was polite. Quiet. Almost forgettable. Then, just after takeoff, he leaned toward a flight attendant. He handed her a note. At first, she barely looked at it. Notes were common. Phone numbers. Small talk. But Cooper didn't smile. He calmly told her she should read it. The note said he had a bomb. Inside the briefcase, he claimed, was a device that could destroy the plane. When the flight attendant sat beside him, Cooper opened the case just enough for her to see what looked like wires and red cylinders. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't angry. He wasn't rushed. He was in control. Cooper laid out his demands clearly. He wanted $200,000 in cash. Not a penny more. Not a penny less. He wanted 4 parachutes. And he wanted them waiting when the plane landed in Seattle. No threats. No shouting. No countdown. Just certainty. The crew immediately realized this wasn't a bluff. The captain informed air traffic control. The FBI was notified. And suddenly, what should have been a forgettable holiday flight became a national emergency. But here's what made everything strange. Cooper didn't act like a desperate criminal. He didn't harm anyone. He didn't panic. He didn't rush the process. He sat back in his seat, sipped his drink, and waited. As the plane circled Seattle, authorities scrambled to meet his demands. They gathered the money. They found the parachutes. They prepared for the worst. After landing, Cooper allowed the passengers to leave peacefully. He kept only a small crew on board. The plane was refueled. The money and parachutes were delivered. Cooper checked the cash carefully. Then he gave his next instruction. The plane would take off again. Low altitude. Slow speed. Landing gear down. Flap set in a specific position. And the destination would be vague. Somewhere south. Somewhere dark. Somewhere no one was watching. The crew complied. And somewhere over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, as rain fell and clouds swallowed the night, D.B. Cooper did the impossible. He opened the rear stairs of the plane. And jumped. No one saw him leave. No one heard him land. No body was ever found. No parachute was ever recovered. And the man who calmly hijacked a plane and vanished into a storm became something more than a criminal. He became a legend. Because people don't just disappear like that. Not without a reason. And not without leaving behind questions that refuse to die. What made D.B. Cooper terrifying wasn't violence. It was how normal he seemed. From the moment he revealed the note, Cooper never raised his voice. He never threatened the crew directly. He didn't wave a weapon. He didn't demand attention. He simply stated facts, as if he were explaining a travel delay. That calm changed everything. Most hijackings at the time were chaotic. Hijackers shouted slogans, made political demands, or acted unpredictably. Cooper did none of that. He didn't mention politics. He didn't claim a cause. He didn't want publicity. He wanted money. And he wanted to leave. Flight attendants later described him as polite. He thanked them. He ordered another drink. He even tipped. At one point, he asked for meals for the crew. This was not the behavior of someone panicking or improvising. This was someone following a plan. The FBI, watching from the ground, initially believed Cooper would make a mistake. They assumed fear or nerves would cause him to slip up. They expected desperation. They were wrong. Cooper knew aviation details that most civilians didn't. He knew the exact airspeed and altitude needed to safely deploy the rear stairs of a Boeing 727. He knew which aircraft could fly with the stairs down. He knew where the controls were. That knowledge raised a dangerous possibility. This wasn't his first time on a plane. He wasn't guessing. And yet, despite all of this, authorities didn't fully grasp how serious the situation was until it was too late. Why? Because Cooper never felt like a threat. Passengers were released unharmed. The crew was treated respectfully. No violence occurred. Even after the ransom arrived, Cooper remained composed. He checked the bills, secured the parachutes, and calmly instructed the crew. There was no chaos, which meant there was no obvious moment to stop him. Fighter jets followed the plane discreetly, but couldn't see inside. The storm outside made visibility impossible. Rain pounded the aircraft. The night swallowed everything below. And somewhere in that darkness, Cooper waited. The crew felt a sudden change in air pressure. A warning light activated in the cockpit. They knew what it meant. The rear stairs had been lowered. But no one knew exactly when Cooper jumped. He could have gone at any moment. The crew was ordered to remain in the cockpit. They couldn't look back. They couldn't hear much over the wind and engines. The plane kept flying. Minutes passed. Then more. Eventually, the plane landed. Cooper was gone. Only his tie was left behind. That single detail would become critical later. The tie contained trace elements that hinted at Cooper's background. But even that clue led nowhere definitive. What shocked investigators most wasn't that Cooper escaped. It was how easily he did it. No alarms were triggered. No one was hurt. No mistakes were obvious. He vanished as cleanly as he appeared. And that raised a chilling thought. If this hijacking felt effortless, if it unfolded exactly as Cooper expected, then maybe the most dangerous part of the plan wasn't the jump. It was everything that came before it. Because someone who can take control of a situation so completely usually knows exactly how it's going to end. The demand itself sounded simple. $200,000. In 1971, that was a fortune. Enough to change a life forever. But what made Cooper's demand strange wasn't the amount. It was how specific everything else was. He didn't ask for just any parachutes. He asked for 4. 2 main parachutes. 2 reserve parachutes. That detail immediately caught investigators' attention. Most hijackers would only need 1. Cooper asked for 4 to create doubt. Authorities couldn't risk sabotaging the equipment because Cooper might force a crew member to jump with him. It was a quiet but brilliant move. Once again, Cooper was thinking ahead. When the plane landed in Seattle, law enforcement moved fast. Passengers were released safely. No one was harmed. The exchange happened calmly on the runway. No dramatic standoff. No shouting. Just procedure. The money was delivered in a knapsack. It was carefully prepared. $20 bills. Sequential serial numbers recorded. Photographed. Logged. Every single bill was traceable. At the time, investigators believed this would guarantee Cooper's capture. Even if he escaped the jump, he'd eventually spend the money. Someone would notice. A serial number would surface. It was only a matter of time. Or so they thought. Cooper inspected the cash carefully. He counted it. He didn't rush. He rejected 1 parachute. He chose another. Calm. Methodical. As if he'd done this before. Then came the second flight. Low altitude. Slow speed. Landing gear down. Flap set exactly as requested. These weren't random instructions. They were precise. Necessary. The Boeing 727 was one of the few planes that could safely deploy rear stairs mid-flight. Cooper knew that. He also knew the flight path would take them over dense forest. Rugged terrain. Miles of darkness. A perfect place to vanish. But here's where the story turns unsettling. Many experts believe Cooper could not have survived the jump. The weather was terrible. Heavy rain. Strong winds. Freezing temperatures. The jump occurred at night, over unknown terrain, with no clear landing zone. He wasn't wearing a helmet. He wasn't wearing specialized gear. One of the parachutes he chose wasn't even steerable. To many investigators, this suggested one of two things. Either Cooper was reckless, or he knew something they didn't. Because people don't calmly jump into a storm unless they believe survival is possible. Which raises the question. Was Cooper trained? Some believed he had military experience, paratrooper training, aviation knowledge. Perhaps he had jumped before. Others believed he was an airline employee or someone with insider access to aircraft design. The tie he left behind supported this theory. Years later, forensic analysis found rare metal particles on the tie elements commonly associated with advanced manufacturing, aerospace, chemicals, possibly even defense-related industries. Cooper wasn't just a random man with a plan. He was someone with a background. Someone who understood systems. And systems are meant to be exploited. After the jump, search teams scoured the forest for weeks. Helicopters flew overhead. Ground teams combed miles of terrain. Rivers were searched. Nothing was found. No body. No parachute. No gear. And more importantly, no money. The serial numbers never appeared. Months passed. Years passed. Decades passed. And the money remained invisible. Which is almost impossible. Unless Cooper never spent it. Or unless he didn't survive to spend it at all. But then, years later, something unexpected happened. A small discovery along a riverbank would reopen the case and complicate it forever. The jump itself is where the legend of DB Cooper was truly born. Because everything about it defied common sense. It was just after 8 p.m. The plane was flying at around 10,000 feet, crawling through heavy rain and violent winds. Below was nothing but darkness. Dense forests. Rivers. Mountains. No lights. No clear landing zone. This was not a controlled skydive. This was a gamble with death. Inside the plane, the crew sat in the cockpit, following Cooper's orders. They could hear the wind battering the aircraft. The warning light flickered, then stayed on. The rear stairs were down. Somewhere behind them, Cooper was preparing. He had tied the money around his waist. He had chosen a parachute that many experts later said was a poor choice, an older model, difficult to steer, not ideal for night jumps. He left behind the other parachute, his briefcase, and his note. Then he vanished. No one saw him jump. No one heard a scream. No one felt a sudden change that confirmed the moment. The crew only knew one thing. He was gone. When the plane landed hours later, investigators rushed on board. The rear stairs were still down. The cabin was empty. Cooper had taken nothing with him except the money and the parachute. At first, authorities were confident. They believed Cooper couldn't have survived. The conditions were brutal. The jump point was estimated over rough terrain near the Columbia River Basin. If he landed in trees, he could have been injured or killed. If he landed in water, hypothermia would have set in quickly. The FBI quietly shifted strategy. Instead of hunting a fugitive, they began searching for a body. But no body appeared. Search teams covered massive areas. Helicopters flew grid patterns. Ground teams searched forests. Rivers were dragged. Farmers were questioned. Nothing surfaced. No parachute fabric. No harness. No cash. It was as if Cooper had evaporated. That impossibility split investigators into two camps. One believed Cooper died in the jump, his body lost to wilderness forever. The other believed something far more unsettling. That Cooper planned this part perfectly. Some experts suggested Cooper may have aimed for a familiar area. He may have known the terrain. He may have jumped closer to a road than authorities realized. Or he may have had help waiting below. There was also the question of timing. Investigators couldn't pinpoint the exact moment Cooper jumped. The plane's speed, wind, and poor visibility made calculations unreliable. That uncertainty widened the possible landing zone by miles. In other words, they were searching blind. And Cooper knew they would be. Years later, pilots would confirm something chilling. The Boeing 727's rear stairway creates a unique aerodynamic effect. A jumper could be pulled downward and backward, away from the aircraft's flight path, making tracking nearly impossible. Cooper may have known this. Which means the jump wasn't reckless. It was calculated. And the storm that night wasn't an obstacle. It was cover. If Cooper survived, he disappeared into chaos on purpose. No witnesses. No cameras. No clear trail. And if he didn't survive, his body became part of a wilderness that rarely gives answers. Either way, the jump achieved its purpose. DB. Cooper was gone. But the case was far from over. Because years later, something surfaced that forced investigators to ask a terrifying question. What if Cooper didn't just escape? What if he succeeded? Years passed, and the silence grew louder. By every logical standard, something should have been found. A body. A parachute. A bundle of cash caught in branches. But the wilderness gave nothing back. Search operations continued long after the headlines faded. The FBI launched one of the longest and most expensive manhunts in US history. Agents interviewed locals. They questioned hunters. They examined maps, wind data, flight paths, and terrain models. Still nothing. No physical trace of DB. Cooper ever surfaced. And that absence became the greatest mystery of all. If Cooper died in the jump, his body should have been discovered eventually. Bone surface. Fabric degrades but leaves remnants. Rivers move objects downstream. Nature reveals secrets over time. But decades passed. Nothing. That reality forced investigators to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Cooper may have survived. Experts revisited the jump conditions. Some argued that while dangerous, survival was not impossible. Cooper could have landed in soft terrain. He could have snagged trees, slowing his fall. He could have reached ground injured but alive. And if he did, he vanished perfectly. No hospital records. No missing person reports that matched. No witnesses who came forward with proof. Which raises the next question. Why didn't he ever use the money? For years, none of the ransom bills appeared in circulation. Not at banks. Not at stores. Not in criminal investigations. $200,000 simply disappeared. That level of restraint is rare. Criminals spend money. Survivors use resources. Unless Cooper planned to stay invisible forever. Or unless he couldn't spend it. Then, in 1980, everything changed. a young boy digging along the banks of the Columbia River found something buried in the sand. 3 decaying bundles of $20 bills. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. At last, physical proof. But instead of solving the case, the discovery deepened the mystery. Only a small portion of the money was found. No parachute. No gear. No body. And the location didn't match where most experts believed Cooper jumped. How did the money get there? Some believed the river carried it downstream over years. Others argued the bills were planted. A few suggested Cooper buried the money himself and later returned to retrieve part of it. But no theory explained everything. Why only some of the money? Why that location? Why no other evidence? The FBI analyzed the bills. They were water damaged, but not destroyed. The rubber bands had decayed. The bills had clearly been there for a long time. Long enough to suggest Cooper never recovered them. Or long enough to suggest he never needed to. The absence of a body, combined with the partial money recovery, created 2 equally disturbing possibilities. Either Cooper died, and nature erased him almost completely. Or he survived, and erased himself. Both outcomes are rare. Both outcomes are terrifying. Because in either case, DB, Cooper achieved something almost unheard of. He defeated the system. No witnesses. No fingerprints. No confirmed identity. The FBI would eventually admit defeat. In 2016, the case was officially closed, citing lack of new evidence. But closing a case doesn't end a story. It freezes it in uncertainty. And uncertainty invites one final obsession. If Cooper wasn't found, then who was he? The discovery along the Columbia River should have ended the mystery. Instead, it reopened every wound. In February 1980, nearly 9 years after DB, Cooper vanished into the storm. A young boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand near Tina Bar, a quiet stretch of riverbank in Washington. Buried just beneath the surface, he found 3 decaying bundles of $20 bills. At first, no one understood what they were. Then the serial numbers were checked. They matched the ransom money. For the first time since the hijacking, Cooper had left undeniable proof that he was real. Not a legend. Not a rumor. A man who had held that money in his hands. But instead of solving the case, the discovery created more questions than answers. Only 5,800 was found. A tiny fraction of the 200,000 ransom. The bills were badly damaged by water and time, held together by degraded rubber bands. They had clearly been there for years. Why would Cooper bury only part of the money? If he survived, why leave it behind? If he died, how did the money end up there? And why was no other evidence found nearby? The location itself was puzzling. Tina Bar was not directly beneath the estimated jump zone. Some experts argued that river currents could have carried the money downstream over time. Others insisted the bills could not have traveled that way without scattering, which raised a disturbing possibility. The money may have been placed there deliberately. If so, by whom? Some investigators believed Cooper survived the jump but later returned to the area. Perhaps injured. Perhaps struggling. Maybe he buried some of the money for safekeeping and never came back. Others believed the money was planted to mislead investigators. A final act of control. A way to keep the mystery alive. But there was another theory that frightened investigators the most. What if Cooper did survive, but never intended to spend the money? What if the money was never the point? Some researchers suggested Cooper's real goal wasn't wealth, but disappearance. The ransom was simply leverage, a way to ensure a clean escape, a plane that followed his instructions, and a jump that wouldn't be interfered with. If Cooper already had money, if he already had a new identity, if he already planned to vanish, then burying the cash would make sense. The money becomes a symbol, a distraction, Something for authorities to chase while Cooper walked away quietly. The FBI examined the recovered bills for clues. They found nothing useful. No fingerprints. No DNA. No fibers. Just decay. The rest of the ransom was never seen again. No bank deposits. No spending sprees. No criminal trails. That silence was almost impossible to explain. Criminals talk. Money leaves footprints. But Cooper left none. The recovered bills didn't prove he died. They didn't prove he lived. They proved something worse. That after 9 years, the case was just as unsolved as it had been on the night of the jump. The money's return didn't close the story. It confirmed that someone, somewhere, had outsmarted the system and walked away without ever being identified. And that realization led investigators to the next obsession. If Cooper wasn't dead, then who was he really? Once the money surfaced, the hunt for DB Cooper became personal. Investigators stopped searching forests and started searching people. Over the years, more than 1,000 suspects were considered. Some were serious. Most were absurd. All of them failed to close the case. The problem was simple. No one could be proven to be Cooper. One of the earliest suspects was a man named Richard McCoy Jr. He committed a similar hijacking months later, jumping from a plane with ransom money. He was a trained paratrooper. He knew aircraft systems. He survived his jump. For a while, it seemed perfect. But witnesses said McCoy looked nothing like Cooper. McCoy also denied involvement, and key details didn't match. Eventually, investigators ruled him out. Then there was Kenneth Christensen, a former airline employee with knowledge of planes and parachutes. He was quiet. He had money after the hijacking. He fit some physical descriptions. But the evidence was circumstantial. No proof. No confirmation. Another suspect, Dwayne Webber, allegedly confessed to his wife on his deathbed that he was DB Cooper. He knew details that weren't public. He had injuries consistent with a bad landing. He even showed emotional reactions when Cooper was mentioned on television. Still not enough. Confessions without evidence mean nothing. Time after time, the same pattern emerged. A suspect would appear promising. The story would gain attention. Then it would collapse under scrutiny. Eyewitness accounts were unreliable. Descriptions conflicted. Memories faded. Cooper's face, once clear, became a blur shaped by imagination and myth. Even forensic science failed to deliver answers. The tie Cooper left behind was tested repeatedly as technology improved. DNA was extracted, but only partial. The profile was too weak to identify anyone conclusively. It was another almost. Another door that led nowhere. What frustrated investigators most was Cooper's discipline. He left almost nothing behind. No fingerprints. No clear accent. No emotional slip. He behaved like someone who had planned not just the crime, but the aftermath. And that led to a disturbing realization. Cooper may have anticipated the investigation. He may have known suspects would emerge. Confessions would be made. Theories would multiply. And none of them would matter. Because without a body or proof, the truth would drown in noise. In 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI officially closed the case. They admitted they had exhausted all credible leads. No new evidence was expected. Resources were needed elsewhere. DB Cooper became history's most successful hijacker, not because he stole money, but because he stole certainty. But one question remained. If so many men could almost be Cooper, what if Cooper was exactly who he appeared to be? Just a man. With knowledge. With patience. With a plan. Someone who walked onto a plane unnoticed. and walked out of history unseen. Which leaves us with the final question. Did D.B. Cooper get away with it? The question has survived longer than the man himself. Did D.B. Cooper get away with it? After decades of investigation, theories, suspects, and silence, the answer remains painfully unclear. But the truth may lie not in what was found, but in what was never discovered. Let's look at the facts one last time. A man hijacked a commercial aircraft using nothing but calm confidence and preparation. He demanded a specific amount of money. He knew the plane better than most passengers ever could. He escaped midair in the middle of a storm. And then, he vanished. No confirmed sightings. No verified spending of the money. No body. No parachute. No identity. That level of disappearance is almost impossible. And yet, it happened. If Cooper died, he did so in a way that left almost no trace, swallowed by wilderness, water, or time itself. That would make him a tragic figure. A man who gambled everything and lost, remembered only because no one ever found him. But if Cooper survived, then he accomplished something extraordinary. He outsmarted the FBI. He defeated one of the most intense manhunts in US history. He erased his past and lived the rest of his life unnoticed. That possibility unsettles people for a reason. It suggests that the system isn't perfect. That someone with enough patience, knowledge, and nerve can slip through every net. The recovered money complicates everything. It neither proves death nor survival. It simply proves the story didn't end in the air. And the suspects? They tell us something important. Not that Cooper was one of them, but that Cooper could have been anyone like them. A veteran. An engineer. An airline worker. A quiet man with specialized knowledge and no need for attention. Someone who didn't want fame. Someone who wanted freedom. The FBI's decision to close the case didn't solve the mystery. It admitted defeat. It acknowledged that without new evidence, the truth would remain out of reach. And maybe that's how Cooper wanted it. No manifesto. No final message. No proof of survival. Just questions. Because legends don't need answers. They live in uncertainty. D.B. Cooper didn't just hijack a plane. He hijacked history. And whether he died in the wilderness or lived out his days under another name, one thing is undeniable. He stepped into a storm and was never seen again. And in doing so, he became something far more powerful than a criminal. He became a mystery.